Joplin, Missouri, in the spring of 1950, was a city in transition. It bore the shape of post-war prosperity, paved streets, new storefronts, the expanding hum of suburban neighborhoods. But along North Sargent Avenue, in the old Roanoke district, there still stood relics of an earlier era, quiet, aging mansions built in the early part of the century, where wealth and privacy lived side by side. At 915 North Sargent sat one of those homes. 2 stories tall, though only the first was used at the time, with a sprawling porch and thick drapes that rarely opened. The house belonged to Gwendolyn Creekmore. She had lived there her entire life, tucked into its rooms like an echo of a fading name. At 49, she was a woman shaped by solitude. She was the daughter of William J. Creekmore, a cattle baron turned bootlegger, who had built the house in 1912 and filled it with the trappings of old money and quiet power. Her father had died in 1934, her mother, Hallie, now lay ill in a hospital bed. And Gwendolyn, physically impaired from an illness in childhood, moved through the home with a halting gait and communicated in short, sometimes garbled phrases. She was alone, but not unknown. Her life had seen brief entanglements. A first husband, C.B. Farnahan, had stolen the family Packard and fled shortly after the wedding. A second, Clifford Polston, lasted scarcely a year. Rumors of a third engagement circled among neighbors but disappeared just as quickly. At the time of her death, she was involved with a man named Lee Moxley, a quiet presence who visited regularly. Some said he was kind. Others said he had a temper. May 28, 1950, was a Sunday. That afternoon, Gwendolyn visited her mother at St. John's Hospital. She took her usual ride with Roy Vaughn, a cab driver she trusted. Vaughn later told police that Gwendolyn had asked him to stop at a pharmacy so she could buy poison. He was startled. She didn't elaborate. He refused the request and took her home instead, arriving at 10:15 p.m. That was the last time she was seen alive. According to hospital staff, Hallie Creekmore had been told earlier that evening that Lee Moxley would be stopping by to pick Gwendolyn up and return with her for another visit. When Gwendolyn failed to appear, Hallie grew concerned. She had a nurse call the house. The line rang, but no one answered. The next morning, on May 29, family friend Doris Bulger arrived at 915 North Sargent. The front door was slightly ajar. Smoke still lingered faintly in the air. In the parlor, near a scorched area of rug and furniture, Doris found the body of Gwendolyn Creekmore. She was lying face down, her body partially nude, surrounded by charred fabric. Her girdle had been burned separately and left folded on a hamper in the bathroom. Blood had pooled and dried beneath her head. A revolver, cocked but unfired, lay beside the telephone. The house was eerily quiet, and nothing appeared to have been taken. Police arrived within minutes, so did reporters, curious neighbors, and eventually the coroner, Dr. W. W. Hurst. But in the critical early hours, the house was left unsecured. No perimeter was established, no effort was made to limit access. By noon, at least a dozen people had walked through the home, tracking soot and ash, brushing against furniture, and stepping over stains that should have been preserved. No fingerprints were taken. The rug was moved, evidence was handled without gloves. By the time officers began photographing the scene, it was already too late. Downstairs, in the basement, officers recovered the weapon, a meat hammer, partially wiped clean but still stained with blood and gray hair. A ball of scorched hair, torn from the scalp, was found in the kitchen trash can. A lamp cord, old and brittle, lay across the center of the bed. On a table near the living room was a bottle of mercurochrome, a household antiseptic, and a half-filled glass beside it. Gwendolyn had swallowed some of the chemical, but not enough to kill her. The autopsy revealed 9 blunt force wounds to the head. Only one had fractured the skull. The poison was present in her stomach, kidneys, and throat. The fire had started after death. There was no soot in her lungs. The cause of death could not be definitively determined. Dr. Hurst ruled it a homicide by person or persons unknown. The next day, May 30th, city officials began feeling the heat of public outrage. The crime had stunned Joplin. The Creekmore name carried weight, and the brutality of the killing, combined with the careless handling of the scene, sent shockwaves through the press and the public. Mayor H. Chris Oltmann acted quickly. He demoted Police Chief Roy Isgrigg and Detective Chief Luther Laster. In their place, he appointed Everett Patrick to take over the investigation full-time. On May 31st, the coroner's jury convened for the first time. They reviewed the initial autopsy findings, heard from Vaughn, Bulger, and a pair of officers. But the jury reached no verdict. Too much was unclear. They reconvened on June 17, this time with the pathology report from Kansas City. Dr. Victor Bueller confirmed that the mercurochrome had not been fatal and that the head trauma, while severe, had not caused instant death. The cause of death remained unclear, but the conclusion was unanimous: this was no accident. The verdict, death at the hands of person or persons unknown, was formalized, and the jury dismissed. The investigation focused quickly on three men. First, Lee Moxley, her boyfriend. His alibi, that he had been at a family gathering in Carthage, was supported only loosely. He denied having plans with Gwendolyn that evening, contradicting what Hallie had told her nurse. He agreed to a polygraph test in Jefferson City. The results were inconclusive. He took a second test shortly after. Again, no definitive results. Police could find no evidence placing him at the scene. Second was Clifford Polston, her ex-husband. Theirs had been a short marriage, with no known recent contact. He provided a strong alibi and was quickly ruled out. The third was a former yardman who had worked on the property. His name was never made public. He was brought in for questioning, offered a personal alibi, and was released after no physical evidence tied him to the scene. All three suspects denied involvement. None were arrested. As the summer wore on, public interest began to fade. The investigation stalled. The mayor's gesture of accountability could not undo the early damage. The evidence had been compromised. The prints were smudged. The weapon, the glass, the bottle. None were preserved with the care required for prosecution. Everett Patrick, the new lead investigator, worked tirelessly but knew he was fighting an uphill battle. Theories spread quickly. Some said it was a jealous lover, perhaps someone from Gwendolyn's past. Others whispered about a vengeful woman. There were suggestions of robbery, but nothing was taken. The revolver was untouched. Jewelry remained on the dresser. Even Gwendolyn's savings were left undisturbed. Then came the stranger details. The girdle, burned but removed and folded. The cord on the bed, never used. The matches near the rug. The precise nature of the burns. 2 separate fires had been set. Neither consumed the house. The killer had not intended to destroy the scene, only to cover their tracks. For a time, police considered the possibility of suicide. That theory was quickly rejected. Gwendolyn could not have inflicted her own head wounds. She could not have torn out her own hair, moved her own body, or lit the fire without assistance. Dr. Hurst dismissed the idea entirely, as did the jury. Gwendolyn Creekmore was buried beside her father in Lake Cemetery in Lamar, Missouri. Her stone bears only her name and the years that bracketed her life. It does not mention how she died. No memorial marks the home where she was killed. Today, the house still stands, though it looks different than it did then. In the 1960s, a second floor was added. The address was changed from 915 to 905 North Sargent. Passers-by would never know what happened behind its doors. Time and construction buried the past. But the questions remain. Who let the killer in? Was the poison given, or was it taken? Why were her clothes removed and burned in 2 separate places? Did the killer act alone? And would the crime have been solved, had the evidence been preserved? Time passed, but the story did not fade. In the absence of justice, the murder of Gwendolyn Creekmore transformed from a police investigation into something far more elusive. It became a cautionary tale, a mystery etched into the bones of a house, a question passed from generation to generation without resolution. No one was ever arrested. No new leads emerged. The house remained, altered but intact, and the questions continued to gather around it like dust. What made the Creekmore case so chilling was not just the violence, it was the methodical nature of it. The combination of poison, blunt force trauma, and postmortem fire was strange, even by the standards of seasoned investigators. Each element on its own could have killed her. None did. Together, they told a story of confusion or overkill, perhaps panic. Or perhaps something colder, something calculated. There were no signs of forced entry. The back door was locked. The basement, normally secured, had been left unlatched. Most believed she had known her killer, had let them in herself. The scene inside suggested she was caught off guard. There was no evidence she screamed or tried to run. If she reached for the revolver near the phone, she didn't fire it. Someone may have been watching her as she slipped into unconsciousness, disoriented from the poison. Someone may have waited in the house with her, until it was too late for her to move, to fight, or to scream. The coroner ruled the fire had been set deliberately after death. 2 ignition points were discovered, one centered on the body, the other on a pile of clothing arranged in the parlor. The fire was hot enough to burn her undergarments and the nearby rug but burned out before consuming the rest of the house. Investigators found matches nearby and suspected the killer had intended to destroy evidence, but either misjudged the timing or changed their mind. One of the strangest elements of the crime was the girdle. It had been burned, but then removed. It was discovered in the bathroom hamper, folded as if someone had tried to present it in a deliberate way. Whether this was symbolic, practical, or intended to confuse investigators remains unclear. Alongside it, in the kitchen trash, was a ball of Gwendolyn's hair, singed and still attached to a piece of scalp. The act of removing it, especially after death, pointed to someone in an unstable emotional state, or someone following a ritual of their own design. Despite extensive questioning and 2 polygraph tests, Lee Moxley was never arrested. He was never cleared either. He faded into the background of Joplin life, remembered only as the man who might have had something to do with a murder no one could prove. Clifford Polston returned to Kansas and was never questioned again. The former yardman disappeared from the narrative entirely. No new names were ever added to the list of suspects. What remained were theories. Some believed Gwendolyn had discovered something. Perhaps someone had been stealing from her, or using her property, or deceiving her emotionally. Others suspected she had tried to end a relationship and paid for it with her life. There were even rumors that the killing had been committed by someone seeking revenge against her father's bootlegging empire, though that empire had crumbled more than a decade earlier. What seems clear is that the killer was deliberate. They used a household poison to disorient her. They delivered a series of blunt blows to her head. They did not rush. They stayed long enough to burn her body and to place a loaded revolver beside the phone, perhaps as a final insult or red herring. And then they walked away, leaving a scene that investigators would spend weeks trying to untangle. But by the time the police began their work, the house had already been compromised. Reporters had photographed the scene before it was secured. Friends had come and gone. Neighbors had walked through the parlor and down the hallways. The police chief was removed, but the damage was done. The evidence was spoiled, the narrative fractured. The coroner's jury reached the only conclusion it could: homicide, by person or persons unknown. And with that, the legal process came to a close. What followed was something far more enduring. Gwendolyn Creekmore became known in Joplin as the poor little rich girl. It was a phrase coined by the local press. It reflected the quiet sadness of her life, born into privilege but left behind by nearly everyone. She had wealth but no independence, companionship but no protection, a home but no safety. Her disabilities had made her vulnerable, and her trust in others had made her a target. Her story began to fade from the news, but not from memory. The house changed over time. In the 1960s, a second floor was added. The address was changed from 915 to 905 North Sargent. Few people in the neighborhood realized the change. Fewer still understood what had happened inside. The new siding and altered floor plan disguised the house's history, but beneath the drywall and paint, the original walls remained. The parlor where she was found was still there, transformed now into a modern living space. The story resurfaced in 2012 when Historic Joplin, a local history blog, published an article detailing the case. It drew new attention to the murder and reignited interest in the Creekmore family's legacy. By 2019, online communities dedicated to unsolved crimes began to share the details. Forums like Web Sleuths and Reddit's Unresolved Mysteries gathered what they could from old clippings, coroner reports, and personal recollections. Readers pieced together timelines and debated theories. Still, no one could answer the central questions. Only one photograph of Gwendolyn Creekmore is known to exist. In it, she stands on a sidewalk holding a small terrier in her arms. She wears a dark coat and looks slightly away from the camera. The photo is grainy, published originally in 1950 as part of an Associated Press article. That image has since been digitally restored, presented now in exhibitions and online profiles as a fragile window into the life of a woman who deserved far more than the world gave her. Gwendolyn was laid to rest in Lake Cemetery in Lamar, Missouri, beside her father. Her gravestone is modest. It bears no mention of how she died. There is no marker near the home, no plaque, no museum collection. Her story exists only in the voices of those who continue to ask what happened. Who let the killer in? Was the poison swallowed willingly, or slipped into her drink? Why were there 2 fires, set with such precision? Did the killer act alone? And if the crime scene had been handled properly, if the evidence had been preserved and secured, could her killer have been caught? These questions remain unanswered, but they are not forgotten. The case has long gone cold, but its chill still lingers in the collective memory of Joplin. Some who remember the Creekmore name do so with reverence. Others recall only the headlines, the whispers, and the uneasy feeling that something terrible once happened behind that door. Gwendolyn Creekmore's life was quiet. Her death was violent. Her story is unfinished. She is buried in Lake Cemetery in Lamar, Missouri, beside her father. Her gravestone is modest, marked only with her name and the dates that bracket her short life. There is no mention of how she died, no hint of the violence, the questions, or the legacy she left behind. And yet, more than 70 years later, the same questions still echo. Who let the killer in? Was the poison given or taken willingly? Why was her clothing burned in 2 separate fires? Did someone help cover it up? And did the failure to protect the scene destroy the only path to justice? The house where it happened is quiet now. The case has gone cold. But Gwendolyn Creekmore's story lives on, in the records, in the memories of a town that never quite let go, and in every voice that dares to ask what really happened behind those locked doors.